Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 24th, 2023. If you live in the Western world where the media is an instrument of psychological warfare being run by those committed to continuing the war against Russia and Ukraine, you're going to be subjected to nonstop psychological warfare in support of continuing the war as we have reached the one-year anniversary of the beginning of the special military operation by Russia. The BBC, CNN, many media are going to devote much of the day to this one-year anniversary, and they'll provide nonstop stories recounting the horrors of war. Now, war is horrible, there's no question about it, but note the selective coverage which recounts the horrors which began on February 24th, 2022, but leaves out the horrors inflicted on the Ukrainian civilians living in the Donbass, who were subject to shelling and killing by the Ukrainian military from 2014 to 2022, all of which preceded the launching of the special military operation. And of course, it goes back to 2014 because that's when the regime change coup in Ukraine was orchestrated by the US and NATO. Now, what about the calls for ceasefire and negotiations without preconditions? This would be acceptable to Russia, as Putin has said, and has been called for by many, from Pope Francis to leaders of countries such as Brazil, Turkey, Hungary, among others. And now President Xi of China has offered a proposal for a diplomatic resolution. If covered at all, it's dismissed as propaganda in support of Russia. The AP says that China's offer cannot be considered seriously because they're not a neutral party. Well, who is a neutral party in this situation? This has been hyped as a human rights violation, an ongoing human rights violation by Russia, as an unprovoked war. Well, what about Zelensky? Is he willing to talk? As long as NATO pours weapons into Ukraine, as long as Biden and others do pilgrimages to Kiev, then Zelensky can stand there and say there must be an unconditional surrender by Russia before there can be talks. So it's clear as the West is, as of this one-year anniversary, committed to a long war, as Scott Ritter has said, to the last Ukrainian. If you want peace, you have to join those marching in cities all over the world this weekend, in Paris, in Rome, in London, Berlin. And there are demonstrations scheduled in 200 other cities in Germany. And there was the big demonstration last week in Washington, last Sunday. There'll be more in the United States. Find when there are going to be demonstrations in your city or organize one. The mad march to nuclear World War III is fueled by the neocons and the unilateralists in the West. And they're using the media to brainwash you into thinking there's no other alternative. They have to be shown that the people and not the military-industrial complex are the sovereigns in the Western governments, and that we will not accept this march to Armageddon. Now to the questions, and I did receive a lot of questions this week. First, what do you make of the UN Security Council hearing on the Russian motion for an investigation into Seymour Hersh's allegations that the United States conducted the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines? Is there a chance for an honest investigation? Well, from the UN hearing yesterday, there was testimony presented by Jeffrey Sachs and by Ray McGovern, both of which Sachs went through what is in Hersh's article, and Ray McGovern, a veteran of many, many years of the CIA, went through his view that this was totally acceptable and in fact provable what Hersh presented, including Hersh's record, but also the actual story that Hersh gave. And then again, yesterday there was a Schiller Institute sponsored event discussing the implications of the Hersh article. But the UN Security Council showed the problem. The governments that should be speaking out about the North Sea pipeline destruction are saying that there is no evidence to back the Hersh story. The U.S. has flatly denied it without allowing an investigation. Well, why no investigation? Where's the transparency? So let me ask a question. Given the events of the last 60 plus years of assassinations, of coups, of civil wars, of wars that have been launched against governments that rejected the policy of the unipolar order, are you surprised to see a cover-up conducted by these countries? Did you think the U.S. government under Biden would allow for an honest investigation into the charges that it was Jake Sullivan who pulled together a task force with the CIA, the Defense Department, the Treasury Department, to carry out the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines? Are you surprised by this cover-up? So again, we come to the same question. Who's going to demand that the investigation take place? And that's the real issue. And you have to be heard on this. Join our mobilization and demand an investigation into what Attorney Francis Boyle said is clearly under the statutes of the Rome provisions that the destruction of the North Sea pipeline was both a terrorist act and an act of war. The next question, and this one, a number of people are complaining about press censorship. Why is Elon Musk not doing more to expose it? Well, Musk, through Matt Taibbi, is doing certain things, and it is getting the story out of the corruption of the interrelationship between the media and the intelligence community and the politicians, but it's not getting adequate coverage. And it's being dismissed by saying, well, Twitter is a private company and can do that because it's not a First Amendment issue. Well, it is a First Amendment issue if the CIA and the FBI are dictating to a private company what's allowable and what's not. I got an email from one clearly frustrated Belgian who expressed concern that the media will not allow anything challenging the acceptable narrative. What can be done? Again, join the mobilization, organize marches, get your friends involved, let your voice be heard. Follow the example of my young colleague, Jose Vega, who's intervening in event after event, demanding that people who should be doing something, like congressmen, including Hakeem Jeffries, the top Democrat in the House, Jose intervened in front of Jeffries and said, what are you going to do to ensure there's an investigation? And Jeffries just said, well, I don't think the United States did it. And he said, well, why don't you demand an investigation? That's what we have to do. Confront the war hawks, confront the politicians who take money from the military-industrial complex and then spread their lies. Demand that they be accountable. Now, the follow-up here. Oh, and by the way, over my shoulder there is a book. I think it's an ironic title, Merchants of Truth, about the current media situation in the United States. I wouldn't recommend the book, but it's clear that there's an enormous pressure that's being brought by podcasters and others to the merchants of truth, so-called, like the New York Times and the Washington Post. Yesterday, the Washington Post finally acknowledged that Biden's global coalition is not really global because it doesn't include any of the countries of the global South. So we can break this press psychological warfare, but we have to do it. Don't count on the New York Times or the Washington Post discovering an inner voice of commitment to truth and goodness. So the next question, what is the best case scenario for effectiveness of the anti-war peace demonstrations underway? I think it was put best by what Helga Zepp-LaRouche said in the webcast yesterday, where she answered this by saying, look what happened in 1989. As the demonstrations were beginning in East Germany, they seemed very small. Handfuls of people, 10, 20 people doing candlelight vigils in Leipzig, Germany. And they were under the watchful eye of the secret police of the communist regime, the Hanukkah regime, that were preparing, if necessary, if these demonstrations grew too large, to crush them. But then one Monday night demonstration, there were 100 people, and this got the government very, very nervous. The next week, because that one wasn't suppressed, 1,000 people showed up. And then the order went out, stop these demonstrations, but by then it was too late. The following week, there were tens of thousands. And the secret government, the Stasi, the police, did not intervene. And the crowd was chanting, "Wir sind das Volk," we are the people. And within a couple of weeks, the East German government fell, the wall came down, and we had an opportunity to put an end to the division, the geopolitical division of the Cold War. That was lost, largely because of the lies of NATO, the lies of the US promising to not move NATO eastward, which they violated repeatedly. But the important point is, the potential was there because people showed up. People had the courage to stand up to the secret police of East Germany and say, "We are the people." So that's an example, as is the case of Jose Vega, of what being truthful and courageous can do to inspire others. So are these demonstrations going to be effective? Well, join us. Let's make them effective. This is not a question. It's not a multiple choice. We have no choice but to make them effective. Next question. Why is there no action being taken to stop the Israeli government, which is conducting raids and seemingly indiscriminate killing of Palestinians? Well, the truth is this has been going on for a long time. And the establishment of essentially a prison camp in Gaza, and the taking over of territory in the West Bank by the Israelis has been allowed by the international community. Now you have a government in Israel of Bibi Netanyahu, who's always been a crazy, arrogant believer in the idea of greater Israel. But this goes back to the teachings of Vladimir Jabotinsky, who David Ben-Gurion called Vladimir Hitler because of Jabotinsky's obvious fascist proclivities. And what did Jabotinsky say? He said, the land of Israel, greater Israel, goes from the Nile to the Tigris-Euphrates. And that's the view of Netanyahu. Netanyahu's father was the American secretary of the Jabotinsky movement. And Netanyahu has that view. And now because he's under pressure because of an indictment and the inability for him to have a decisive victory at the polls, he's brought into his coalition extremist settlers, the movement which produced the killer of Yitzhak Rabin. These are the people now who are head of the justice ministry in Israel, who are out in the streets urging and demanding that the Israel Defense Forces crush the Palestinian resolve to have justice. So the question is, will there be justice? And the obvious point is that I think the more important question for the Palestinians would be to study the example of Mandela and study the example of Gandhi in India. If you resort to violence, even though violence may seem to be the only course you have, you bring on more violence in response. That's the nature of an imperial power. And at this point, Israel is acting as an imperial power against people living within its borders. The real question then is not just nonviolent resistance from the Palestinians, but a mobilization around the world against this policy. Now, this is an important moment in history where the injustices can be addressed. I think that the most important thing is to stop the war in Ukraine, but at the same time, people should look at what's happening inside Israel, or look at what's being done to the Syrian people by the U.S. unwillingness to lift the sanctions that have been imposed against Syria because the Syrians did not accept a U.S. demand for regime change when the U.S. was supporting the takeover of Syria by ISIS and al-Qaeda terrorists. So there are many, many injustices. The question is getting the ball rolling to establish a new security and development architecture for mankind. And the Schiller Institute is leading this fight dealing with the Ukraine war, but it's the same fight for all of these other injustices. This is the time where people of goodwill and human understanding and kindness have to speak out and act. Now, the final question, and I received a number of emails from people saying, I can't find your updates on YouTube or Facebook. What's happening? One person asked if I'm okay. Did the Ukrainian Committee to Combat Disinformation get to me? Are you still posting them? Well, the answer is yes, we are. And we had a strike against us, against the LaRouche organization on YouTube, which I think will be lifted in a couple of days. I'm not sure what's going on with Facebook, where we were once getting 30 to 40,000 views. It's now been reduced to below 10,000, and people are saying to me, where do I find you on Facebook? Well, you can be persistent in your search, but if you want to see these updates every day, the place to go is to the LaRouche organization and click at the top where it says programs. And the first thing that comes up is Harley's Daily Update. My update is being posted there every single day, and you can see it there. Hopefully we'll straighten out the YouTube situation, the Facebook situation. We're looking, I think we have a Rumble account. We'll see if we can do more with that. But the point is, the suppression of truth is an essential feature of the psychological warfare designed to convince you that there's no action you can take that will succeed. That's a damn lie, typical of a media which is trying to demoralize and essentially force submission in a population, which has a history of rising up to fight injustice. So that's what has to happen now. What Lincoln called the better angels of our souls has to emerge. These better angels have to fight as warrior angels for justice and an end to war and the creation of the conditions for a durable peace. While you're going to the LaRouche organization to look for my updates, you can also see there statements from Helga Zepp-LaRouche and a number of articles, statements from Diane Sayre and others. So join us, join this mobilization now. And that's basically what I have to say. Thank you for your questions, and we'll see you again next week.